We interrupt this program to bring you a special report from News 5.
It may be the most senseless tragedy to have ever hit Clare County, Michigan.
At least 6 people have been killed in Clare County.
The road leading to the home of Mr. and Mrs. George Post was cordoned off throughout the night. Near dawn, the gruesome story began to unfold. Here in a house in Surrey Township near the village of Lake, 7 people had been shot to death around 6 o'clock last night. 3 of them were only children.
7 people lie dead at a farmhouse near Farwell, Michigan in 1982. The victims include 3 children. Only a monster full of hate and evil could do something like this. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case known as the Rock Road Massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on February 16, 1982, a woman named Alice Russell would arrive at her family's farmhouse near Farwell, Michigan, with her husband and their 2 kids. When they got there, the family's 3 dogs were chained up outside like they normally were, and they were barking. Not considered unusual to them because, this particular evening there was a family reunion going on, so there were supposed to be a lot of people, and the dogs would typically bark. Now, at this point in the evening, the reunion was supposed to be already in full swing, but when Alice and her family arrived, they didn't hear anything. There were no voices coming from inside the house, no laughter, no chattering, dead silent. They also noticed that the lights inside the house appeared to be off, which is also something a little strange. So Alice and her family, they would enter the home through a side door which goes into the home's kitchen. The kitchen is pitch dark, so Alice turns, flips the switch on, and in that moment, Alice would discover that the majority of her family was gone forever. 22-year-old Garnetta Ronning was born and raised in Michigan. I don't know a whole lot about her life, unfortunately, but her mother, Vaudrey, at some point down the road, would remarry. And she married a man named George W. Post. Now, George, who already had 7 kids of his own, took in Garnetta as his stepdaughter very happily. And he was thrilled to have another child, in his life. Life wasn't always perfect in sunshine and butterflies. As a matter of fact, one occasion, Garnetta, at the age of 15, she was caught by George having inappropriate relations with a young boy. And so George went to Vaudrey, her mother, and then Garnetta said, he's lying. It was George. He actually tried to sexually assault me. Whoa. Something she would quickly go on to recant, and she lied because she didn't want to get in trouble. Okay. About a year or so after that, when she was 16 years old, Garnetta would end up getting a job. She had become a waitress. This was at a place called K&A Chow House, which was in nearby Loomis, Michigan. Garnetta would actually work there for quite some time. Several years later, around 1977, she was still there as a waitress. She, at this point, was 19 years old, and one day, a 27-year-old man walked in, and his name was Robert Lee Haggart, and apparently he, I guess it was love at first sight for him. When he saw Garnetta, and so what he did was he continued to go to the restaurant every single day, probably ordering the same thing and probably only going there when he knew Garnetta was working, and eventually he worked up the courage to ask her out, and she said yes. Very quickly after this, Garnetta got pregnant. She was not ready to have a child, so she got an abortion. Now, this was not to Robert's knowledge. He had no idea she was doing that. But eventually he found out, and he got really pissed that he wasn't included in that decision, and he wanted a child. So the two of them basically ended up kind of drifting apart and splitting up. But a couple of years later, the two of them would rekindle their old relationship in 1980, and they moved in together. And then in February of 1981, they got hitched. But very quickly, the marriage was off to a very rocky start. Garnetta had suspected that Robert was possibly being unfaithful. At the very least, he was spending basically every single night out at bars and spending their money on booze and other things, money they didn't really have, and that it irritated her. It's basically believed that Garnetta had confronted him, and then the very next day, she came into work with a very bruised face. This is because Robert beat the shit out of her. And around the same time, she also found out that Robert, who was working at like some sort of pig farm or something like that, well, he had tried to purchase some cattle for $17,000, and he did so by knowingly writing a check that he knew would bounce. And this would actually end up getting him on police radar. And so basically at that point, Garnetta filed for divorce and she moved out. So when she moved out and said, hey, we're divorcing, and when this whole bounce check thing happened and the police were wanting to question him about it, he basically fled. He would leave Michigan and go to Tennessee. Robert Lee Haggart was born in Michigan in 1950. Again, not a whole lot of information about him either. But it all seems like he had a pretty normal childhood. He grew up in a normal, decent home. He would go to school, graduate high school, and then he would enlist in the Army, where he was a sharpshooter. He would do a tour in Germany and Vietnam, where he was praised for his sharpshooting skills. And then eventually he would be discharged from the Army, honorably as far as I can tell. Shortly after being discharged from the Army, though, it appears that he had taken up a love for drinking lots of booze, became kind of a borderline alcoholic, and this led to more issues. One day at a wedding reception, he got super drunk, and he was caught having relations with a 14-year-old girl. He got arrested for that, and unbelievably, they let him take a plea deal for this, and the charges were taking indecent liberties. Never in my life heard of that. And he was sentenced to 3 years probation. Never spent a day in prison for this act. And because he was a free man, well, he was allowed to then sexually assault another woman. He promptly got caught for this, and he served a long time in prison, right? No, 2 years. 2 years for assaulting a woman. And then he would end up meeting Garnetta, because he moved back to Michigan in 1977. So, now getting back to 1981, the two of them they're separated. He's in Tennessee. Garnetta has actually now moved to Florida. And it appears that they've all gone their separate ways, and pretty much we got to get the divorce finalized, but after that, we're done. But their divorce wasn't final yet, and basically the courts had set a hearing date to finalize the divorce in February of 1982. And that would eventually lead to a massacre. The court set a date of February 17th, 1982 for the divorce hearing. So now Garnetta is coming home from Florida, and Robert is taking a bus from Tennessee to Michigan. Now, because 22-year-old Garnetta was coming home, George Post decided, hey, let's throw a big family reunion. Let's have a big family party since, everyone will be here now. George Post and his family lived in a 56-acre farm property in Clare County, Michigan, which was, I guess, just a little outside of the town of Farwell. Farwell, Michigan, at the time was a teeny tiny little town that consisted of literally like 700 people, and that was it. This is like one of those towns where Pretty much everybody really truly did know everybody. George Post at the time was 53 years old, and he was the town's postman. His last name was Post, and he was the postman. That's pretty neat. Now, like I said earlier, he had 7 kids. He was treasurer of the local school board. He donated cattle and pigs. He was just an all-around, well-respected guy in the community. Everyone knew him. Everyone loved him. Everyone loved the whole family. So it's believed that at approximately 5 p.m. on February 16th, 1982, the day before the whole court proceedings were to happen, George was at the farmhouse property, and he was sort of getting things ready for the reunion, which was going to be happening that evening. At that same time, one of his daughters, which is 29-year-old Helen Gaffney, she was also there with her 4 children, and I don't think her husband or boyfriend or whatever, I don't think he was there at all. Garnetta and her mother, Vaudrey, had been out shopping, I guess getting some last-minute things. And so, at around 5 p.m., George had gone down to the basement. And unbeknownst to him, waiting in the basement was Robert Haggart. Robert was holding one of George's shotguns. And then something led to something, and Robert shot George Post, and he fell to the ground dead. At this point, it's believed that this is when Helen heard a commotion. She also heard the gunshot, and then she immediately took her kids and ran out of the house. And they got into the pickup truck that they were using. And her intent, obviously, was to try to flee the area because she was scared, and the kids were scared because they heard a gunshot right close by. And unfortunately, it's obvious that Robert saw this. So he ran out of the farmhouse, armed with a shotgun in one hand and a handgun in the other. He then pointed both guns at the truck with the people inside it now, and he just began to fire and just riddled the truck with bullets. The truck never got a chance to speed away. When all of a sudden blood was basically pouring out of the truck and just sort of covering the snow beneath, Robert at that point decided to take some clean snow, covered up the bloody snow to make it look like nothing was wrong. He then goes back into the house, into the kitchen. He turns off all of the lights, and he just lies in wait because at that point, Vaudrey and Garnetta were still out. It's believed they got home sometime between roughly 5:15 and 6:30 p.m. They don't know exactly when, but obviously they got home. When they walked into the house through the kitchen outside door, they must have turned on the light, saw Robert, and Robert opened fire on both of them and shot both Vaudrey and Garnetta dead. Robert then steals Vaudrey's car, and he flees the scene. And it's believed that just a few short minutes after he fled, one of George Post's other daughters, Alice, had arrived to the farmhouse with her family to join in on the reunion festivities. And that's when they walked into the kitchen, turned on the lights, because Robert must have turned them back off, and she found the bodies of the 2 women in the kitchen. They panic, they call 911 immediately, police arrive, and they find more bodies. They find George Post just at the foot of the stairs of the basement, and then in the pickup truck outside the house, they find 4 more bodies. Helen and 3 of her 4 children had been shot dead in the truck, and they were all slumped over. 10-year-old Angela, 8-year-old Tom, and 7-year-old Amy were deceased. Lying on the floor of the truck was a 15-month-old baby. The baby was still alive. As a matter of fact, the baby was relatively unharmed, but she was covered head to toe in the blood of her mother and siblings, and her mother was basically lying on top of her, and it's believed that Helen had done that on purpose to try to shield her children from the bullets. Unfortunately, it did not work completely, but she did likely save the life of her 15-month-old baby. The baby was basically had her arms around and clutching one of her sisters. The 57-acre farm was located on 5603 Rock Road. Basically, immediately the media would call this the Rock Road Massacre. Robert Haggart had, like I said, stolen Vaudrey's vehicle, which was a 1980 Buick LeSabre. He drove all the way back to Tennessee, where he would go to a restaurant that was owned by his friend and roommate, and he was go there to shoot the shit and eat after he just brutally murdered 7 people. And the roommate / friend looked out and saw the vehicle that Robert came in. He made note of it because also playing on the TV, on the news, was the story of the Rock Road Massacre.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report from News 5.
It may be the most senseless tragedy to have ever hit Clare County, Michigan.
At least 6 people have been killed in Clare County.
The road leading to the home of Mr. and Mrs. George Post was cordoned off throughout the night. Near dawn, the gruesome story began to unfold. Here in a house in Surrey Township near the village of Lake, 7 people had been shot to death around 6 o'clock last night. 3 of them were only children.
That showed the victims' faces and showed the stolen vehicle. And the friend was like, okay, well, Robert knows this family pretty well, and also he is driving that exact car. So the friend calls the police to rat his friend out. Good. Robert, I think, overhears this or something. He then leaves the restaurant, gets into the car, and begins to speed away. Police at this point, though, are already setting up roadblocks all over the area to catch this man. And he gets basically stuck at one of those roadblocks, and he tries to back up. But as he's doing that, there's like a slew of officers just pointing guns directly at him. So he's like, oh, shit, okay. And then he stops. And apparently, even though he had a gun in his hand at that point, he put it down and decided to surrender. Police would eventually find a pair of bloody jeans at Robert Haggart's house. And the blood on the jeans, I guess, had some sort of... They tested it with whatever testing they could do in 1982. Something to do with the blood type that was super uncommon, super rare, that matched the same blood type that one of the victims at the farmhouse had. And only one of them had that blood type. And so that was pretty, kind of almost to them at the time, pretty conclusive that the blood on his jeans came from the victims. And they were confirmed to be his jeans. And it was a lot of blood all over them as well. They also, so when he was arrested, he had a gun in his car. And they basically took some of the bullets they recovered from the crime scene were exact matches to bullets that would have been fired from this gun. So it was his gun that they could confirm were the ones to shoot some of the victims. He apparently used a shotgun, a handgun, and at one point he used a rifle. They also had many witnesses who could place Robert at or near the farmhouse during when the murders would have happened. He did get on a bus on February 15th from Tennessee. They confirmed that with the bus ticket. They confirmed with witnesses, the bus driver who can confirm he was on it. And he got there about a day early before the court proceedings was supposed to happen. Again, many people placed him there. So they knew he was there when the murders took place. There was no questions about it. Not to mention, he was in possession of, when he was arrested, of the stolen vehicle. Vaudrey's car. He could have only gotten that from the farmhouse after she was killed. So basically, it's a slam dunk. So he is now charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder for the baby. The trial goes on. They put up all the witnesses who can place him there. They put the testimony from the experts about the blood found on the jeans, and they testify about the stolen car and all of this. And basically, they're trying. The defense is like, well, what will his motive be? And honestly, the motive was never truly established at trial. It's only basically assumed that it had something to do with the divorce. But they weren't really able to truly establish that because they didn't really actually have proof of the actual motive he had. Because at the time, he never said anything. Robert claimed during a police interview that he got to the farmhouse after they were all dead. They were already dead when I got there. And so I just stole a car and left. What? You go to a farmhouse, see 7 bodies, and you do nothing, and you're not guilty, so you steal a car? And what? Literally makes no sense. And literally, no one bought it. But oddly enough, the defense did not put him on the stand. He didn't testify. As a matter of fact, the defense put up no witnesses. They put up no experts. They put up nobody. They basically did not even try his case. They were working under the idea that it's the prosecution's job to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And pretty much they did that. And so the defense still sat there. I'm like, man, we got nothing. And I think it's because it's clear that he did it. And they just didn't have a defense. So the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder for 6 of the victims. For one of the victims, they only found him guilty of second-degree murder. And the reasoning they gave was because of the fact that they could not determine what his intentions were that day, what his motive was, because they could not prove that he actually planned this. They weren't sure if this was a spur of the moment type thing. That's why they went with second degree murder with one of the kids. I don't know why they didn't do that with the rest. I don't know. But he was convicted on all the charges, and the judge would sentence him to 7 life sentences, plus an additional 32 years for the attempted murder. But, again, it's very unclear as to why he did this. Garnetta was the one to file for divorce, but he appeared to have moved on. He moved out of state. He got a girlfriend. He had a new girlfriend named Linda. I guess they were happy together. As a matter of fact, she was in the car with him when he got arrested. She wasn't charged with anything. But I don't know. Was this something where... And I think later on, I think I might have seen or saw a video or something that said that he eventually would kind of suggest that this was one of those, well, one thing led to the other. So what I'm thinking is maybe he went to the farmhouse to confront Garnetta, and she wasn't there, but George was, and maybe he and George got into some sort of argument, which led to Robert picking up the shotgun and out of reaction just shot George. Well, Helen and her kids are there now, so great. They probably know he's there, and now they're witnesses. So now he needed to eliminate them. And then, well, crap, when Garnetta and Vaudry get home, they're going to know who did this. They're going to think it's me. Now I got to take them out. So he waited for them to come home and shot both of them. Could very easily be that kind of situation where this was just completely unplanned. He's clearly very unhinged, and he's a monster, but it doesn't necessarily mean he planned it ahead of time. But it doesn't really matter because he spent the rest of his life in prison. Because in November of 2002, Robert Lee Haggart died of natural causes in prison at the age of 53. Now, at some point during this, Robert Haggart was required to provide his DNA. This is just one of those things that in the legal system you have to do. In 2009, 7 years after Robert's death, there was a CODIS hit from his DNA matching the DNA found at a cold case sexual assault and murder from way back in 1977. In October of 1977, the body of a woman named Doris Arndt was found just dumped on the side of the road off the I-75 in Michigan. Now, when she was found, police started their investigation, and actually Robert Haggart was considered a person of interest in that case. This is because several witnesses placed Robert at a bar the same night as Doris, and they were actually even interacting with one another. And so police questioned him, and at that time he had just started dating Garnetta. And so they even questioned Garnetta and asked like if they knew where he was during these times. And apparently nothing was ever truly established to physically connect him to the murder of Doris. They, unfortunately, lacking physical evidence, they did collect the DNA, but in 1977 it meant absolutely nothing. They had nothing to arrest him on. They only had their suspicions. And so finally in 2009, they got that hit. So it turns out he was a murderer the entire time. But at least Doris's family, I hope, to those who may still be around, were given some kind of closure about her murder. And, they can rest now that her killer is boiling in the rusty cauldrons of hell. So, yay! This is another one of these stories, and I've told many of these, and I'm sure you've heard many more, where there is a guy who was clearly a problematic person. He had been caught having relations with a child when he was an adult. He was in his mid-20s. He got no time for that. They basically gave him a very minor little on the wrist for it. And then, because he wasn't in jail for that, he would go on to sexually assault another woman. And of course, they sentenced him to 2.5 years. He only served 2 of those years. So he got, 6 months, got out 6 months early. It's another situation where the justice system's failed. This guy was clearly a menace, a predator, and at one point a killer. And they had suspicions that he was a killer, but no proof. This is just another, once again, it's like this happens so much where they're not punished enough for their actions. And it would lead to several murders. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. There's just nothing we can do about it now, other than maybe hopefully learn from these mistakes, possibly, and maybe put these people in prison for longer. I don't know. This man murdered 7 people, he including 3 children, and he managed to kill a 4th child. For what? He just casually killed 7 people like it was nothing. I don't understand it. I never will. But that is it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. But that is it for this video, True Crime Maroonies. And as I always close out every single video, shut up, Mike. I'm very unstable. Bye. He turned himself in, and then he would escape jail. Would they ever catch the lady killer? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the lady killer. Viewer discretion is advised. It was July 31st, 1971 at approximately 11 p.m. A 911 operator in Nassau County, New York, would get a phone call from a man who was calling from a phone booth. He told them to go to a certain apartment because in that apartment they're going to find his murdered girlfriend, which would be 19-year-old Natalie Brown. The man would soon be identified as Ricardo Caputo. He had been dating Natalie for roughly a year or so before this all happened. Ricardo was originally from Argentina. Ricardo tells police that he fully intended to marry Natalie, that they were going to get married. But the friends of Natalie would say, no, that's not true at all. Even if he was going to ask, she was already planning to end the relationship. And Natalie had told this to a number of her friends. I think Ricardo was trying to paint himself as a good person, someone who loved his girlfriend very much, but the friends and family would say otherwise. Police arrived to the home where Natalie lived, and they do in fact find her deceased body on the kitchen floor. This is a recreation image, of course, but she had been stabbed multiple times and was found slumped over, leaning against a cabinets. There was blood everywhere. I mean, this was an incredibly vicious, very violent attack. Now, while family and friends said that, Ricardo Caputo was leading police astray with this whole idea that we're going to get married, they also would state that Ricardo never showed any kind of signs of violence, never anything like that, just that he wasn't the right fit for Natalie. Natalie's parents even kind of liked Ricardo. They thought he was a pretty decent guy. Again, just not the right guy for Natalie. Ricardo, was an attractive guy. He was very charming, very sweet, or at least that's how he put himself out there. But what they didn't know at this time was that Ricardo had killed, and he would kill again and again and again. Ricardo Caputo was arrested and taken to jail for the murder of Natalie Brown. They found out that Ricardo had actually just entered the United States back in 1970, so a short time before all this, and he came from Argentina. When he was living in Argentina, he was being treated on a pretty consistent basis with some severe mental health issues. Now, while awaiting his trial, he would actually have to speak to psychologists, and the psychologist would determine that Ricardo was incompetent to stand trial. And so because of that, he was actually put into a state hospital, and this was a hospital for the criminally insane. While in that institution, he is assigned a psychiatrist, mental health professional, and her name was Judith Becker. She was 26 years old at the time she was assigned to Ricardo's case. Now, from the outside looking in, Judith's family just sort of thought this was a patient and doctor type relationship between the two of these people, between Judith and between Ricardo. But what actually was the truth was that it was that, but then it was also something else. Judith had a very unique approach towards her patients. She kind of talked to them and interacted with them as if the two of them were friends. And because Ricardo Caputo was so charming and so, handsome and whatnot, she ended up falling for him. She was succumbed to his charms. For the next 2 years, Ricardo is working Judith in order to get her to trust him enough to eventually get him out of this institution. And so by 1973, she actually manages to get him transferred to a lower security institution where he would have more freedom to roam about the grounds. And soon after this is when Judith and Ricardo would actually start a romantic relationship. Ricardo, given the lesser restrictions on him now, was able to leave the hospital from time to time, and he would go to Judith's apartment pretty frequently. Now, her family didn't believe there was a romantic relationship between the two of them, but police believed there was. But then one day, Judith actually took Ricardo and brought him to her family to meet him, which kind of surprised them a little bit. On October 21st, 1974, Judith failed to show up to work. Then she failed to show up to a family gathering where they were doing a boating trip that she always attended. It was like a thing they always did. And she never called or anything. So the family would go to her apartment. They got a key from the super of that building and they entered Judith's place. They found Judith lying on her back, on her bed. She was deceased. Judith had been beaten to death and also strangled. Judith's car was missing. Her checkbook was missing. And it's believed that Ricardo killed Judith, stole the car, stole the checkbook, and fled. They had his fingerprints already on record because he was in jail at one point, and they found fingerprints at the crime scene with Judith, and they confirmed that the fingerprints found in certain spots that would have led to them believing he was her killer, they were a match. But now he's on the run. They don't know where he is. They put an all-points bulletin out for him, but also for Judith's vehicle. 6 months later, now in San Francisco, California, Ricardo Caputo met another woman, a 28-year-old woman. Her name was Barbara Ann Taylor. She was a local in San Francisco. She was an editor out there. Pretty quickly into them meeting, they started dating. Because again, he charmed his way into the life of another woman. They would end up taking a romantic little trip to Yosemite. She came home from this trip in Yosemite. She seemed different. She seemed a little like, and so she told her family that she was planning to break up with Ricardo. On March 30th, 1975, after her family had not heard from her, they gained entry to her apartment, and just like the other victims, they found her dead. Fingerprints also found at the crime scene that would have matched whoever killed her matched Ricardo's fingerprints. 5 days goes by at the US-Mexico border, which would be near the El Paso, Texas area. A man named Ricardo Diaz was taken into custody. When he arrived at that facility, he had to give his fingerprints, and he knew from that moment that if I give them my fingerprints, eventually they're going to link me to being Ricardo Caputo, this wanted murderer. And so he, along with a few other detainees, managed to steal a couple of weapons and make their own weapons, and they managed to escape the facility. However, pretty soon after this, all of the men were recaptured except for Ricardo. He told them, the other men who were eventually recaptured, that he was going back to Mexico City. When Ricardo Caputo arrived in Mexico City, he met another woman, a college-aged girl, 21 years old, named Laura Marie Gomez. Again, they struck up a relationship. He charmed his way into her life. Again, he seemed to be this kind of kind-hearted, sweet person to everyone, but of course, we know in hindsight that is not true. On October 3rd, 1977, Laura Gomez was found brutally murdered inside of her home. She had been beaten and stomped to death, and they could determine that she was also tortured for some time before her life was over. The autopsy revealed one more victim. Laura was pregnant. She was about 2.5 to 3 months pregnant. This led police to believe that her killer was probably the father of the baby. And then based on descriptions and everything, eventually they kind of put this together that the man she was with before, he killed her was in fact Ricardo Caputo. So now they're looking for him all over the place, and he's on the run. He is a danger, and he is a scary person. On August 2nd, 1983, in a West Side Manhattan apartment in New York, another victim, 60-year-old Jacqueline Bernard. Jacqueline had her throat crushed. On January 22nd, 1985, a private investigator hired by Jacqueline's family received a phone call, a tip, that directly named Jacqueline's killer as being Ricardo Caputo. That this person who told the private investigator was told this by Ricardo himself. He was boasting and bragging about it. They said that Ricardo looks a little bit different now. He's a little heavier, and he has started to bald. So they came up with a composite drawing based on that person's description of what Ricardo might look like at that point. It wouldn't be until March 9th of 1994 when finally they found him. Well, they didn't actually find him, he found them. Once again, he had his moral compass was working, because like he turned himself in for that first murder, he once again calls police in New York to say, it was me, I killed those other women, I will fly back to New York and turn myself in. He had been in Argentina when he made that phone call. He then flew to New York and turned himself in again. He said the victims that he had already killed were haunting his nightmares, that he was afraid that he would kill again. When he was on the run, he had been married on 2 separate occasions. Luckily, those women did not die. He had 6 children amongst those women. When he surrendered in New York officially, when they had him in custody, he confessed to the murders of Natalie, Judith, Barbara, and Laura. In 1995, he pled guilty to manslaughter in Natalie's death and was given an 8 to 25-year sentence. In June, he pleaded guilty to Judith's murder and was given a sentence of 25 years to life. And that was about all they could do, because in 1997, Ricardo Caputo dies in prison. He actually died of a heart attack while playing basketball. He was 48 years old. Now, Jacqueline never got the justice that she deserved. because he died before he could go to trial for her murder. It didn't sound like he went to trial for Laura's murder either. But Ricardo Caputo, who they nicknamed the Lady Killer, was dead now. He had been caught, he had been sentenced. Hopefully with the other convictions that would have happened, he would have been in prison forever, but it doesn't matter because he's dead now and he can't hurt anyone ever again. And so in the end, the 4 victims got the justice they very rightfully deserved. A young man was last seen walking down a poorly lit, windy, snowy road and has never been seen again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Colin Gillis. Viewer discretion is advised. It's March of 2012, and it is Tupper Lake, New York. Winter is technically over, but it is still snowy everywhere. The temperatures outside are frigid. People are usually bundled up in their jackets, their thick pants and boots. I wouldn't know. I'm in Arizona. We don't know what that stuff is. Colin Gillis had recently turned 18. He was a high school graduate from Tupper Lake High School in Tupper Lake, New York. He graduated in 2011. Colin was a very, very intelligent young man. As a matter of fact, he ended up skipping a grade in high school, and he graduated a year before pretty much most of his friends did. He was attending State University at New York, which is in Brockport, New York. This is probably 5-6 hours away from Tupper Lake, and he had just enrolled at college, and everything was going great. Colin was one of 3 kids. He was the middle child to 3 boys. His brothers were very, very close with him. They were like the best of friends, this little trio. Being a year advanced in school, this didn't really ever stop Colin from not only his brothers being his close friends, but he had a large circle of friends outside of his brothers. He was very socially active. He loved to go to parties. He just loved to hang out with his friends in large groups. He also enjoyed playing football and basketball. He was athletically gifted. He was funny. He always made people laugh. He could also help educate people just based on his intelligence level. He was a pre-med student at college, and so he could always hold down a really intelligent conversation with his friends. At this point in 2012, Colin, who again is 18 years old, was away at college, so he wasn't living at home in Tupper Lake, but he was on spring break, and so in March of 2012, he would go back to Tupper Lake to stay with his family. His mom and dad were absolutely thrilled to have him back home. Brothers were excited to have him in the area. This also gave him a chance to catch up with a lot of his local friends who were not at the same college as him. It was the evening of March 11th, 2012. This was actually just a couple of weeks after Colin's birthday, but he had dinner that night with his family. They had a good conversation. They watched TV for a bit, and then Colin said, "Hey, I'm going to be heading out because I'm going to go hang out with some friends that I haven't seen in a while." Colin would head out in jeans and a short sleeve shirt, despite the temperature being in the low teens. Very, very cold, but he was used to New York winters, and this never really bothered him. However, he did bring a backpack with him, which did have some warmer clothing in it, like a jacket. But when he left the house, he wasn't wearing that jacket. His parents would recall that Colin left the house sometime approximately at 8:30 p.m. with his backpack, and then he closed the door after saying goodbye to them, and they didn't know that that would be the last time they would ever see their son again. Initially, Colin would just walk right down the street to a friend's house where a couple of friends were hanging out, and that was where his night began. From what it sounds like, the friends didn't really have any set agenda that night. It was just sort of kind of, we're going to roll with it and see how the night goes, and we're just going to go where the night takes us, you know? So they hung out at the friend's house down the street for a little bit, but then they decided to kind of move on to a party that was happening at another house on Lincoln Avenue. They were there at that house for a little bit of time before they said, all right, we heard about another party happening about 5 or 6 miles away, and so we're going to go there. This next party was on, and I hope I don't butcher this name, but Pascagoula Road, about 5 miles away from Lincoln Avenue. That party was going on because someone at that house was celebrating their 21st birthday, so of course there's going to be a lot of people there, a lot of drinking, a lot of young folk mingling. Colin and his friends that he was with that night didn't necessarily, they weren't like good, solid friends with anyone at that party. However, they were acquaintances with some of the people. They weren't technically invited to this party. It wasn't that kind of party either. It was, if you hear about it, come on by kind of thing. You know, Tupper Lake is this tiny, or at least back then, I'm not sure what it is now, but this tiny kind of community of about 6,000 or 7,000 people back in 2012. It's one of those things where if you weren't like close with someone, you at least knew people. So Colin, along with like 9 other friends, head to this party on Makingantuecrimerer Road. And at first, they're welcomed in. Everything seems to be going great. They're having a good time. They're laughing, they're joking, they're drinking despite not being of age. Don't drink underage, kids, is what I definitely should say. But according to some of Colin's friends, plus other people at this party, which would later tell the story to police, a fight had broke out at this party. And at first it was a verbal argument that turned into a physical altercation between a decently large amount of people. Some described this as an actual brawl, but eventually the brawl simmered down, and Colin's friends at that point said, listen, we don't really know people here very well, and so we're just going to leave, because if more fights break out like this, we're all underage, and the cops are called, we're going to get in trouble. And so Colin's friends were like, all right, let's just leave. But Colin decided to, and no one really knows why, he decided he wanted to stay. He said, despite the brawl that happened, which he was not involved in that one, he was having a fun time. He was getting along with everyone, because again, that's the type of person that he was. If you didn't know him, he would become quick friends. His friends tried to get him to leave with them, but he just refused. He wouldn't do it. And so all 9 of the friends he entered the party with had left the house in their vehicles. At that point, Colin, who did not drive a vehicle, was sort of just kind of on his own. By the accounts of witnesses, Colin Gillis would leave on his own at around 1 o'clock in the morning. Then the party itself, according to partygoers, began to completely just dissipate around 1:30 a.m. According to people at the party, another fight had broken out that night. Some people say that Colin was involved in this fight. That is just what they say. It doesn't sound like anyone can really truly corroborate that story, but enough people said that he had something to do with it. They just don't know what. So Colin was visually seen by many people walking out of the house, and then he was seen walking north up Makingantuecrimerer Road, and then that road would then lead to, I guess, Route 3, New York Route 3. Makingantuecrimerer Road is a very dark, poorly lit, windy road. It's snowing. It's the middle of the night. It's dark, and Colin was seen leaving the house, by the way, still in a short sleeve shirt. He has his backpack over him, but he did not have on any cold weather clothing. This is a road with no sidewalks. This is a road that didn't really have any kind of like bike paths or anything like that. And the speed limit around this road was about 55 miles per hour. But there was not a lot of traffic on this road typically, especially at 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning. It's dead. But walking down this road at 1 o'clock in the morning is going to be difficult, because it's a very windy path and it's pitch dark. And so it's really hard to see. Most of the houses are kind of obscured from the road by trees. So when he got to Route 3, he have turned right, because that would have been the direction of his home. But they know for a fact that he did not turn right, he actually turned left. This was going to be taking him from the Tupper Lake area out to a town called Piercefield. Route 3 is a little bit more, has more traffic than the other road does, but again, at this time of night, it's still not going to be a ton of cars. And still, it's a dark road that's poorly lit. This is not a road that people really ever would see people just walking down. It would be unusual to see someone walking. But at 1:40 a.m., a pedestrian who was his vehicle, in fact, did see someone walking down this road, Route 3, at that time of night. This was a man named Rich Rosentretter, who I guess was the editor of Lake Placid News at that time. He had been in his car because he was on an 80-mile trip because he had been picking up his mom from a different location and bringing her back to Tupper Lake. And that's when he saw someone walking down the road. And he confirms that this man, this young man he described him as, was walking towards Piercefield. So that's how they know Colin was there, based on the description the man gave. He also described this man as having a backpack on and not having on a jacket. And again, this was odd to the man driving because it's like, it's freezing cold outside. Why aren't you wearing a jacket? The witness, for a moment, thought about stopping and asking if this young man needed a ride or needed help, but he thought otherwise because he had his elderly mom in the car with him. It was late at night, 1:40 in the morning. This is a stranger. They don't know if this could be a violent person. So instead, what the man does is he drives, I think, 3 or 4 miles more down the road to a police station where he lets police know that there was this young guy walking on the side of the road. You might want to check it out. They do send a patrol car out on that area, and by the time they get there, there is no young man seen walking, so they leave it. Then another young man named Austin was in a car with his cousin Jordan, and they say that around 1:30 a.m. they also saw Colin walking. Austin and Jordan were in their car driving towards Piercefield, the direction that Colin was walking. These are the people who actually witnessed Colin Gillis turning onto Route 3 from Pascagoula Road. They witnessed him actually making that left turn walking. Austin, who's driving the car, stops the car and says, "Hey, do you need a ride?" And Colin says, "No, I have a ride on the way. I've a friend of mine." And so Austin just drives on. Once Austin dropped his cousin off at their destination, Austin would be driving back the opposite direction. And once again, he saw Colin Gillis. And again, he asked him, "Do you need a ride?" And I guess this time he spotted Colin at Bruce Richards Logging Company, or near it. This is roughly 1,000 feet from the Pascagoula Road Route 3 split or cross street or whatever, which Austin found unusual because he had been some time, and by the time he drove back the opposite direction, it was unusual that Colin hadn't gotten very far from where he first saw him. Nobody actually knows if Colin Gillis was actually waiting for a friend to pick him up or if he was just sketchy about getting into a car with someone he didn't know, because apparently the cell phone service in that area was horrific. It was very difficult to make calls, but no one would ever come forward to state that, yeah, I was the person Colin was waiting for. They couldn't find any proof or evidence that Colin was in fact waiting for someone. If he called someone, it wasn't in any records. He also, based on the 9 friends he was with earlier that night, they all said that there was no arrangement for any of them to come back and pick Colin up. It was basically once they left, Colin was on his own. But anyway, as Austin drives away, that's essentially the last time anyone sees Colin. And based on the description that would later go out, based on the backpack, what he looked like, what he was wearing, they knew that this was Colin Gillis that was seen. He did not appear to be in any kind of distress. He doesn't seem like he was trying to run away or avoid someone or something. Yeah, he seemed normal. He was supposed to be home that night, and when he didn't come home that night, his parents were like, okay, he probably just fell asleep at a friend's house, he'll be back tomorrow. But then tomorrow comes and goes, Colin still isn't there. And so his parents are like, okay. They start calling his friends and knocking on the doors of his friends, like, is Colin here? And they're like, no, we haven't seen him since the party. And that's where okay, we're officially concerned, we're calling police. And that's what they do. They report him missing. On Monday morning, the New York State Police, the Tupper Lake Police are all involved. They also have the Department of Environmental Conservation helping them. Plus, they had the friends of Colin, they had his family, and a whole bunch of volunteers. They were out searching, and they were doing very thorough grid searches, and they didn't miss a square inch. They were really looking for him. They brought in helicopters, and they were searching by air. And keep in mind, it's very snowy. Everything is covered in snow at this time. And so if someone is going to be you're going to find maybe a body, for example, and if that body hasn't been covered by snow, it should be easy to spot in the white snow. But they did not find anything, any trace of him. On that Monday afternoon, as the search is going on, police do hold a press conference to say they have found 2 items that they believe belong to Colin. One of them was his driver's license. The other one would not be revealed as to what it actually was until a couple of years later. I guess it was a tobacco pipe that Colin had. By Tuesday, they had begun searching the Raquette River and Raquette Pond, or Racket Pond. Did I say that right? I probably butchered that. They also searched the Piercefield Flow. They really did search like bodies of water that he could have possibly ended up in. They searched them. And again, they came up with nothing. Not his backpack, not clothing, and obviously not him. They dredged the waters. They really combed through every square inch. Nothing. It is known that Colin was not wearing his jacket, and the temperature was in the teens, so it was freezing cold. And so there was always that theory that kind of lingered of maybe he just ended up freezing to death. He died from the weather, right? But you would find him still. Like if he is now just dead somewhere in this area, even after the snow has melted, especially after the snow was melted, you'd think you'd find him. They didn't. There was never a single trace of him body-wise found. I mean, could animals have gotten to him? I guess in this area there were, obviously there's wildlife, but not wildlife that would completely eviscerate a human body. You would find some trace of him somewhere. That wasn't the case. There was also a theory that, well, maybe Colin was involved in a hit and run. This was a very dark road, like I said. There wasn't much going on. The speed limit was 55 miles per hour, which is fast enough that if you're going to be hit by someone, it's going to do some damage, probably even kill you. But the road, just based on their observations after the fact, that road was just, you had like one or two cars on the road at any given point. Like it was just, there was no one on it. However, one of the witnesses who said that while they're in their car, when they spotted Colin, one of those witnesses said they came very close to accidentally hitting him because he kind of just came out of nowhere in terms of like the darkness, because it was very dark. So it is possible that somebody hit him and they didn't want to get caught for killing someone. So they maybe picked up his body and moved him somewhere, and God only knows where that would be. But you'd think you would find some blood or any kind of evidence of this hit and run. They didn't. There was no blood ever found. There was no like shoe found that was his shoes. There actually was a shoe found that they thought was his, but it wasn't. But, there wasn't like anything like that. No broken pieces of car or anything. No skid marks. Nothing to indicate he had been hit. Is it still possible? Absolutely. But they couldn't say for certain that's what happened. Within a week, they are setting up checkpoints, and they're basically stopping every car that comes by. They're handing out flyers with Colin Gillis's information on it, asking if anyone had been driving on that road that night. And that's where police got the witness accounts from two different people that I mentioned about seeing Colin, and that's how they knew where he would have been walking. After about 2 weeks, this intense search for Colin began to sort of slowly calm down, and they were no longer doing these big group grid searches. This was more now of, well, we can't find him. We haven't found any indications of what happened to him. We've searched everywhere and we're at a loss. So at this point, they were only going to search based on tips or anything like that. And now they were conducting more of just like an investigation on the side. And that's when they were really diving into the party scenario. And that's how they found out that Colin was possibly involved in the second fight that broke out at the party, but no one could really say for certain, again, if he was, but there was a possibility he was. And so they were trying to interview as many people as possible to see if, well, did anyone target Colin at the party for some reason? And did somebody maybe find Colin walking on the side of the road that was involved in that fight and said, oh, there's one of those, people I fought with, and then did something to him? It would have had to have happened after the two other witnesses saw him and saw Colin looking normal and calm. So it could have happened after 1:40 a.m. That's another person, because the party they did say broke up around 1:30. So this would line up with maybe one of those people, the party, leaving around 1:30 to 1:40, finding Colin on the road and doing something to him. But who that person was, they don't know. Is that even what happened? They don't know. Could Colin have been met by just a complete random stranger on this dark road? Also a possibility. Someone may have seen this young kid walking and decided, you know what, I'm going to kidnap him and I'm going to kill him, or whatever the case may be. It really does sound like Colin was walking on that road and he got into a vehicle. That's the vibe. That's the what it looks like. Because of the fact that they have not found him anywhere, and if he died by cold weather, he would have been found. It just seems like someone picked him up, whether it was someone he knew and got in willingly, or it was a random encounter that took him. That just seems like what may have been what happened. But again, I can't say that for certain. This just theory. Over the years, police have gotten more tips, and there was a point, I think somewhat kind of recently, where they were given tips about a certain location, and so they took like a backhoe there and some other equipment, and they began digging. They actually dug up on a property with the intent of they're going to find Colin. They dug and they dug and they dug, but there was nothing. There are no remains, no trace of him found. It was empty, nothing. Was Colin severely intoxicated? That's a possibility, but no one can really say for certain if he was or not. No one really gave that opinion. There's also that thought that maybe someone drugged him, and that's why he walked down the wrong side of the road. He may have been disoriented, but then what happened after that? If you look at that, like maybe he was severely intoxicated and he was possibly drugged by someone who did that, and then why let him go from the party if you were planning on doing something bad? Maybe they were just doing a prank. Who knows? But that would explain why he walked down the wrong direction, because he was supposed to walk right, but he turned left instead. But the people that saw him on the road didn't say he seemed to be out of sorts or disoriented. He seemed just like he was normally walking. And when one of them talked to him, he wasn't slurring his speech or anything, and he seemed normal. And that might play into a big portion of what happened to him. Why did he walk down that path? Why did he walk the wrong direction? But the thing is there's a million answers to that question. And what's the right answer? Was it disorientation? Was he led down that path? Did he just accidentally do it, like thinking he was walking in a certain direction, Was he actually meeting someone? Again, no one has ever come forward to state that they were the person he was supposed to be meeting, or they were the person supposed to be picking him up. There's just a lot of possibilities here, and they don't know what the actual one is. And so now this small community is filled with rumors about what may have happened to him. He was killed by someone, he was kidnapped, or he was drunk and fell in the snow and died. Maybe he fell in a body of water, but they just haven't been able to find him yet. But the fact they have found absolutely nothing to say, to even point them in the right direction, that's where it stands. My gut tells me, just based on the fact they haven't found him, is that foul play was involved. I don't know why. It's just that's what is, I guess, based on me telling so many stories over the years, that's just the gut feeling I have. But who it is, your guess is as good as mine. 18-year-old Colin Gillis was last seen on the night of March 11th, 2012, leaving a party. Or I guess the morning of March 12th. Colin Gillis has blonde hair, blue eyes. He was 6'1", weighed around 170 pounds. Colin had a scar on his left shoulder. He was last seen wearing a men's size medium short-sleeved American Eagle V-neck shirt with black stripes, size 32 blue boot cut Levi jeans, and a size 10 red high-top Nike Air sneakers. He was carrying an orange LL Bean backpack containing a reversible black and red LL Bean coat. There is currently a $25,000 reward being offered for any information that helps lead to finding Colin Gillis, or finding people or persons who may have done something to him. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have information about the disappearance of 18-year-old Colin Gillis, please contact the New York State Police at 518-897-2000. You can report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. Colin Gillis's brothers, his parents, his friends, they all deserve to have him back. They deserve to lay him to rest. If this wasn't an accident, if this was something that just happened to him on his own, hopefully they can find him. But if somebody did something to him, and somebody took him or killed him and buried him, you've got to come forward to say what you know. His family deserves that. And Colin Gillis should get the justice, if that is the case, that he rightfully deserves. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give this video a like so more people can see it, because it just takes that one person seeing this video or any video about Colin, not just mine, anyone's, to get the answers. So you never know. So yeah, please follow me over on TikTok if you so choose. And yeah, that's it. That is it for this video. So I will say goodbye. So long. Off Wiener's End. Do I have wiener on the goodbye. So long. Farewell. Off Wiener's End. Why is the word off Wiener's End goodbye? Oh, I'm saying it completely wrong. That's what it is. Well, I don't speak whatever language, including English. Yep. Okay. Well, failed once again to say goodbye properly. Haha. What? How do I put my hand? I don't know what to do with my hands. Sayonara, suck faces. Nope.